Good afternoon. It's nice to see all of you here. Your families left a very valuable history in this community, and you're here today representing your ancestors who contributed largely to this community. We gather here today to celebrate and honor some of the early business leaders of Thomas who contributed to the history, progress, and development of our community in the high Alleghenies of West Virginia. Many of these early settlers in Thomas emigrated from foreign lands such as Austria, Russia, Ireland, Italy, Lithuania, Poland, and more. At one time during the heyday of this community, we had a total of 18 different nationalities represented in the community of Thomas alone. The majority were Italian, but again, there were many others. These people came here to forge a better life for themselves and their families, not certain what they would find, and having to learn a new language while also adjusting to a new culture. Upon arrival in this new country, many wore badges showing the places where they were going to in this country, as they spoke no English. I personally knew many of these community leaders while growing up as a child, and being so young, not really understanding the value and significance of their contributions to our community, and the value of their culture and their heritage, and what valuable lessons I could have learned from these families. Today, we celebrate and honor the following families. Colabrese. Giovanni Colabrese Sr. and his wife Maria Rapone, along with Giovanni's brother Francesco, also known as Frank, along with his wife, arrived in Douglas in 1906 from Pescocantonzo, Italy. Both families moved into a duplex home owned by the mining company, where they both worked in difficult and unsafe conditions. Frank later became a long-time and well-known barber in Douglas and was well-known and respected in the community. As time passed, both households began having children who became first-generation Americans. Among those I remember the most were Mary Colabrese Bennett, a teacher who was my high school homeroom teacher. One of my favorite memories of Miss Bennett was each day prior to our noon meal, she would lead us in a song of thanksgiving, and that memory sticks with me today. There was Felix, who was a teacher, school principal, and county superintendent. And there was Ernest and Bill, who ran the Colabrese Brothers Hardware, furniture, and appliance stores, of which there were 3 in total. One with the Colabrese sign down here in front, one up where the Pottery store is on Spruce Street, and one in Davis where the Thompson Babcock Lumber Building still stands today. The main store occupied the former site of Sam and Mary Delatos's Roma Restaurant. Ernest, Frank, and Felix were members of the Polka Dots Polka Band, along with Joe and John DePollo. These 3 Colabrese brothers were also members of the Thomas City Band, which was led by Patsy Santangelo, a cobbler, and another talented musician. Additionally, this building right down the street that has the two balconies, one on top of each other, was Patsy's cobbler shop. And many times Patsy would play his trumpet from the balcony to entertain the community. And back in those days, there was an older bandstand that was in back of Miners and Merchants Bank. He would also play there to entertain the community. In addition, Patsy also played with the Thomas Community Band. The next family we honor is the DePollo family, and we especially honor Virginia Delatos DePollo. Virginia married one of the young DePollo twins, John DePollo, and she and her late husband have lived in Winchester for many years. Virginia, thank you for making this special trip here today. It means a lot to us. Giuseppe DePollo was from Introdacqua, Abruzzo, Italy, while his wife Agnese Falabella was born in Lagonegro, Basilicata, Italy. Giuseppe, later known as Joe, arrived in Thomas in 1891 at the age of 25, first working at the coke ovens for Davis Coal and Coke Company. He had traveled back and forth to Italy several times, during which he and his wife Agnese, who had remained in Italy, had their children. Finally, deciding to stay in America, Giuseppe sent for Agnese and their children to join him in 1903. The family arrived at Ellis Island on October 22, 1903, aboard the ship Liguria out of Naples, Italy. By this time, Giuseppe had become Joe. Upon arrival in Thomas, Giuseppe and Agnese had more children, among them being a son, John DePollo Sr. By 1906, Giuseppe opened a small grocery store. Upon the arrival of 1912, Joe decided he needed a bigger store and a new home for his family. The deed on the new building was held by W.L. Cottrell. By 1915, the deed on the new building was already paid in full. By 1912 or 1913, Joe added a meat market on East Avenue, which was managed by his son-in-law, Mike Caruso. Joe served on the board of directors of Miners and Merchants Bank and was also a president of the bank. Additionally, Joe was a member of the Sons of Italy, an organization that helped those in need. Joe helped finance the construction of the Benedetto building, now more commonly known and has been commonly known for a long time as the Flats. Joe served on the board of directors of Miners and Merchants Bank. Son John and his wife, Elsie Butch, or in Italian, Buccini, continued to run DePollo's store after the death of Agnes and Joe. Among their children, they had sons Joe and John, one of whom Virginia was married to, John, who both entered the insurance business. Joe and John also played in the Polka Dots band. Among the young man named Giuseppe DePollo arrived in America with nothing little more than a dream. He would one day become Joe DePollo, a man of influence, a successful businessman, respected by the community, and the father of a large family. He was admired by friends, family, and the townspeople, and was generous and helpful to those in need. He made his mark in the world, and the town of Columbus was a better place because of his presence. He was a man to be proud of. The next family we honor is the Delatos family. Virginia, her maiden name was Delatos, and her parents were Sam and Mary, who had the Roma Restaurant right next door. Very popular. Sam Delatos was born in Randisa, Italy in 1897, while his wife, Mary Titino, was born in Cosenza, Italy in 1905. Sam arrived in America at the port of New York City on December 31st, 1903, from Naples, Italy. During that time, work was scarce, so Sam, who was 6, and his father Salvatore came to America to find work. They ended up in Copton to work in the mines. Coal was dug and loaded by hand, and the horse-drawn carts were numbered to identify the miner. Like many young men, Sam lived in a boarding house. Again, times were very rough back then, and I'm not sure, especially my generation, and I'll be 74 in August, can appreciate how hard our ancestors worked and the difficult lives they lived, but they succeeded. During 1917, World War I was in progress, and like many immigrants of the time, being proud of his new country, Sam was the first person in Tucker County to join the Army, serving in France until the end of the war. After the war was over, Sam returned to Copton, and the mines, by which time electric had been introduced, and Sam worked as a motorman. The mines were a very dangerous proposition back then, with roof collapses and cave-ins. Birds and rats were used to determine if the gas in the air was too dangerous to work. If a miner was hurt, he was on his own. I've got several of the accident reports from Davis Coal and Coke from back then, and the sad story is each one of those reports blamed the miner for their accident, even though working conditions were actually the result of their injury or death. The Titino family came to America about 1904 or 1905. They also settled in Copton. Mary's father, Pasquale, died in 1916 at age 49 with no Social Security and no life insurance to get by on. So Mary's mother, Rosa, began running a boarding house, baking bread, and selling goat milk to support the family. Sam Delatos and Mary Titino married on August 16, 1920. After Sam's leg was injured in the mines, about 1929, he could no longer work in the mines. So, as Mary was a good cook, they borrowed money from Giuseppe DePollo and opened the ever-popular Roma Restaurant. In later years, they sold the building to the Colabrese Brothers. The Delatos family, like many of the early immigrants in Thomas, was very proud of their new country and honored it with 2 generations serving in 2 different world wars. They were also an industrious family who contributed not only to the town of Thomas, but also to their new country. We also celebrate the Milkint family who came from Lithuania. This is an interesting story because of the tragedy of their struggles to leave Lithuania. Lithuania has become the object of power struggles over the past several centuries, many by Russia and others by the Nazis. Under the Third Partition, Lithuania was controlled by Imperial Russia between 1795 to 1918. During World War II, Nazi Germany took control. And after the war, Russia once again took control of Lithuania. This kind of explains why, when you look at the naturalization records of the Tucker County immigrants, you will see people who actually came from Lithuania are shown as having come from Russia. But the fact is, Lithuania always existed. It was just under the power and control of another country, hostile country. This explains that connotation. This continued succession of power over Lithuania would obviously make life in the country very difficult. In 1990, Lithuania was the first country in the Soviet Republic to break away and declare independence. They're very proud of that, and all of us in this room should be also. That is a milestone in world history. Charles Clarence Milkint, 1861 to 1945, came to America from Lithuania and arrived at the port of New York City on August 1st, 1889, through Hamburg, Germany, aboard the Bismarck vessel. And his wife, Elizabeth Barbara Varatinskas, 1860 to 1951, arrived in New York City from Lithuania in May 1895, along with their sons Charles Jr., John, Tony, Joseph, and Peter, after having been sent for by Charles Sr. 2 daughters, Annie and Elizabeth, were born here in the U.S. One of Joe's earliest memories was of the family's early escape and imprisonment as they attempted to leave Lithuania. His father, Charles, who had come to America 8 years later, was trying to save enough money to send for his family. Money was not the only problem. Charles' wife, Elizabeth, would need to find someone to help them escape. Mr. Milkint finally borrowed $300, which was a lot of money back in those days, to send to his wife for a bribe and transportation. Elizabeth, thinking she had found a bargain, bribed a man other than the one Charles recommended. He betrayed them. At the German border, they were captured and held imprisoned for several months. The family was finally freed and made the 18-day journey by sea. By 1904, the family had arrived in Copeland, where Elizabeth assisted family finances by taking in boarders, and Joe was sent to the mines as soon as he was old enough. They didn't have child labor laws like we do now. It was a whole different ballgame. In 1905, Charles Sr. built the building still standing at 172 Spruce Street in Thomas, which contained 2 storefronts and several upstairs apartments. Charles was a dry goods merchant. Sons Joe and Pete operated soft drink bottling operation 2 doors down in the Anna Taranto building. Sons John and Charles Jr. worked in the store. The 1940 census shows Charles Sr. living on Brown Street in Thomas. Joe and Pete later sold the bottling plant and devoted all their time to a garage, which was 2 doors down in the bottling plant. In 1920-21, they built a garage where they sold Rio cars and Speedwagon trucks. Later, they took on dealerships for Hudson, Essex, DeSoto, and Plymouth. What I remember is the Plymouth brand. In 1931, Pete purchased additional land in neighboring Preston County. There, he developed the land into a lake, a motel, 15 cabins, and a restaurant, along with his house and what is known today and has been known for in many years as the smallest church in 48 states. It was a fine mountain resort. In 1927, Pete began serving on the board of directors of Miners and Merchants Bank, where he too later became president in 1959. By the 1910 census, John was listed as the owner of the store, with brothers Tony and Joe also working in the store, where they operated a grocery store and meat market. The entire family lived in the upstairs apartments. Other records refer to the Milkint brothers, which appear to be John, Tony, Joseph, and Charles Jr., and listed in later census records as owning an automotive repair shop, which was on Spruce Street, which stands down here further down Spruce Street. A small portion of that is still standing today. It was 2 doors down from Spruce Street. A particular note is the fact that son Tony was a Japanese prisoner of war during World War II, during the Bataan Death March, which began on April the 9th, 1942. Tony, by the grace of God, survived this tragic event and lived until 1961. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. A total of 26,000 Filipinos and 1,500 Americans died as a result of the Bataan Death March, either as a result of the march itself or additional cruel treatment under imprisonment. Okay, as we close this narrative, we honor, respect, and cherish those early immigrants in the early history of Thomas who gave up their countries of origin for the American dream. We honor those who left their countries for a new land and a new culture, not knowing what they would find. Many of those brave immigrants left their countries under difficult situations, fraught with danger, and a sea journey lasting 18 days on packed ships. The Irish called their ships coffin ships because so many of those who immigrated from Ireland died along the way on the treacherous journey across the ocean. And during my last trip to Ireland, I had an opportunity to see one of those on the Liffey River. Today they wouldn't be called ships, they would be called a small yacht. Many of the early Thomas immigrants built homes in Thomas and businesses which still stand today, this building being one of them. This was built by Phoebe Thayer. She was an early businesswoman, way ahead of her time. Back then, women were not business leaders, but Phoebe Thayer was. We honor, respect, and cherish those immigrants who contributed to the history, progress, and development of the city of Thomas. May God bless them, one and all. Thank you.